Good morning. We are on Memhei Amud Aleph, 45a. I want to dedicate today's class to the well-being of my grandmother, Chasya Bas Chayas Shera. My parents are on the way to Australia now. She's in not very good condition, at least medically speaking. And God willing, tomorrow night I'll be going for Shabbos. I'm going to come back here Sunday night. So tomorrow morning we'll have a class, God willing, and then we'll pick up again following Monday.
So Wednesday, the next Monday, we'll have class.
Right. That's Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then Monday we'll pick up again, God willing. If all goes to plan. Okay. The next section of the Gemara is going to discuss the next section of the Mishnah. We can look at that text there. So it's there's one line that's not as narrow as the top lines and it's not as wide as the bottom lines. Yeah, you see that in the right in the middle of the page. So the last four words there is Nimsa Tamun Bagal. If the corpse, the mystery unresolved murder, is found in a mound. A gal is a mound of stones, kind of grave-looking thing. It's a mound of stone. Or if it's found hanging on a tree, then it's exempt from the egla rufa process. The Gemara said, and the Mishnah said, the reason is because the verse says, Ki motze chalo ba'adama. When you find a corpse, be'adama. This word be'adama, adama means earth, and then the bays, the prefix, can either mean in or on. So our Mishnah learns it to mean ba'adama, on the earth. And therefore the egla ruf only applies if you find the corpse on the earth, as opposed to if it's found in the earth, under a mound, or if it's found hanging on a tree, suspended off the earth. That's our Mishnah. So the Gemara says, therefore,
It's under a mound or on top of a mound?
Under. If it's on a mound, then it's still considered on the ground. It says it's in the ground. Right? That was our Mishnah. Let's look at that, make it clear. Just pulling up the text here. This is Memhei Amud Aleph, and the Mishnah is Amud Aleph, right? I don't think it's in that packet, but it's 44a. I believe that's the Mishnah is. Yeah. No. 44b, sorry. Yeah. The Mishnah said, yeah, that's right. If you found it in a mound or hanging from a tree or floating on the water, there was no agla rufa because the pasuk says ba'adama, which means on the ground, and that excludes hanging from a tree, in the ground, or floating on the water. It's only specifically when it's found on the ground. That's our Mishnah. So what the Gemara is about to do is the Gemara is about to compare it to another verse in which the verse says this prefix be in relation to a field or ground. And the Gemara is going to compare it to the way that bays is learned there to the way it's learned here. We clear on what we're doing? Right? We're clear on this? Right? The root word is adama, which means ground, and then there's a prefix be, the bays, that either means in or on. And here we're learning it means on the ground. And if it's in the ground, it doesn't count. So there's another time the verse says such a thing, where the root word there is sadeh, field, and there's a bays, there's a adama, bisada, and bisada could either mean in the field or on the field. So the Gemara is going to compare that law to this law. In order to do that properly, let's first look at the text in question. The text in question, I'm pulling it up on the screen here, but you can see it on this. If you see it on the side of your page, the little vav there on the left-hand column. Kisikzer, you see it? It's Deuteronomy Devarim chapter 24, Pasuk 19, verse 19. You see it there? So where it says little vav, yeah, that's it. The Pasuk says, Kisikzer ketzircha, when you reap your harvest, cutting your harvest, bisatcha, in your field. V'shachachta, and you'll forget, oimer ashif, basada, in your field. Twice now we have that. See that?
Yeah.
You'll cut harvest in your field, and you will forget a sheaf in your field. Twice this field with a prefix of bays. Once your field, once the field. All this is significant. So the pasuk says, you shall not go back to take it. You forgot it, leave it there. Lager, for the convert, la yasim, for the convert. It doesn't mean convert here, it means a stranger. It means someone who's doesn't have any of his own property. He's a foreigner, he's just hanging around here. La yasim, for the orphan, la mana, and to the widow. Yiyah, it shall be. Don't go back and take it, it's left for those who are in need. That God your Lord will bless you on all the work that you do. This is the pasuk. The mitzvah of shikha, of forgetting, leaving that which you forgot behind. Everyone points out it's the one mitzvah that you can only fulfill if you take no action, not even aware of it. As soon as you're aware of it, it's not shikha anymore. It's the most passive mitzvah, or a person fulfills a mitzvah without even knowing it. It's not just that. There are other mitzvahs you can fulfill without knowing, like if money fell out of your pocket and a poor person picked it up. But in this case, you can only fulfill it if you don't know about it. I believe it's the only mitzvah like that. Anyway, that's the mitzvah here. And what we're going to be looking at is these two words, bisatcha, in your field, bisada, in the field, right? Once when it describes your harvest, and once when it describes what you forget. When you're harvesting your harvest in your field or on your field, depending on how you read that days, and you forget a sheaf in your field or on your field, depending how you read it. This is where we are. Okay, so this is the comparison we're doing. And we're comparing this to the found corpse, be'adama, in the field or on the field, depending on how you read it. Okay, this is where we're at. Clear so far? Just laying the groundwork so we know what's happening. With me or no?
Yeah, man, I'm just thinking. I'll reserve my question for later.
Is it going to stop us from understanding?
Just in your field or on your field doesn't seem to be any differentiation as opposed to in the ground and on the ground.
Yes, good question. So we're going to learn that in the moment. Okay, we'll see. That's a good question, but yes. Yes, that's correct. So let's see. So let's back to the Gemara then. The second word on the widest set of lines. Lema, let us suggest, says the Gemara. Masnisa, in our Mishnah, which says that bi adama means on the ground. And therefore, if you're to find a corpse buried beneath a mound or floating on the tree, it's excluded from the law of Eglarufa, because the Eglarufa says it's got to be on the ground, ba'adama. So let us suggest that reading, Rabbi Yehuda follows the view of Rabbi Yehuda, but loy Rabbanan, and not the view of the sages. Why is that? Because Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbanan dispute how to learn, how to translate the prefix bays with respect to besada, with respect to on your field, or in your field, with respect to the law of shikha, the forgotten sheaf in your field. So let's see. Tanya, if we learned. The verse reads, we just read it. V'shachachta omer basada, and you will forget a sheaf in your field. So this is the second basada, not the first one, which says you're reaping your harvest in your field. But rather here it says, the second phrase, and you forget the sheaf in your field. Prat l'tamun. This excludes if the sheaf you forgot was buried in the ground. Right, literally. Same case. Here it's a corpse, not the same case, but here's a corpse, unresolved murder buried in the ground, excluded from the law of Eglarufa. And here, a forgotten sheaf buried in the ground, as well excluded from the law, because we're translating the word bays the prefix base to be in, or sorry, on. And if it's in, it's excluded. Give it Rabbi Yehuda. These are the words of Rabbi Yehuda. And thus, that would be consistent with our Mishnah. Yeah? But the Chachamim say, Bisada, in your field, not only does it not come to exclude anything, but actually comes to include. L'rabos esatomin. It comes to include that which is buried in the field. Because it says bisada in your field. So even if it's buried, it's still part of the mitzvah of shechha. So he reads it the exact opposite. Okay. Now let's make another point. Was this clear so far? So this is the Gemara saying that Rabbi Yehuda is consistent with our Mishnah. Because he reads bit to mean on. And therefore, if the corpse is found in the ground, not part of the eglarufa, and if the sheep is found in the ground, also not part. And the Chacham say no, bin means literally in, and therefore even if you find it in the field, literally buried in the field, it's still part of the mitzvah, and therefore presumably if you found the corpse buried in the ground, it would also be part of the mitzvah.
And that's what your opinion?
The sages. This is again a presumption because the sages don't speak of their view of the law of eglarufa. We're making that assumption by comparing the same reading to this verse, to how they read the verse of shikha. Okay, that's only if there's a consistency. The Gemara is going to break down the consistency in a moment and explain why, contextually, one could and should read the verses of Egla Rufa in one way and the verses of Shikha in another way. Why is that? Here's the premise. Pointed out to you that in the verse, go back to that verse again, you can see it there on your left. The verse says in your field twice. Once in your field and once in field. Right? The verse opens up. When you harvest when you reap your harvest in your field. So you already know where you are. And then it says, and you forget a sheaf in the field. What if that whole word basada wasn't there? Would anything be missing? Nothing would be missing. We would know it already. You're reaping the harvest in your field and you forget a sheaf. It would be self-understood. We already know the location of where you are because he already said you're harvesting you're reaping your harvest in the field. So therefore, the extra basada is open for derivation because you already know the geographic location from the first half of the verse, and thus the dispute between Rabbi Yehuda and the sages are not only in the question of how you translate the word beis, but actually what they're doing is they're arguing on what you derive from the added word in the field. Do you derive an exclusion, and therefore we exclude that which is buried? Or do you derive an inclusion, and therefore you include that which is buried? That's the dispute here. It's not simply a question of translating the letter beis. And therefore, if that's the case, we have to go back to the verses of the lost Eglarufa and ask ourselves the same thing. Is there an extra word here from which is a derivation to which you can apply the same dispute from here to there? Following? That's what the Gemara is about to do.
Is there any differentiation pointing out in the first verse it says in your first part of us in your field versus in the?
Yes, we're going to get to that. We are going to get to that. But at the moment, the premise of the next statement of the Gemara is this that the question of Buddha and the sages are not, as you just suggested, a question of how you understand the prefix beis to mean in or on. It's more than that. It's a question of when you have this extra word, do you use it as an inclusive derivation, and therefore you include that which is buried in the ground, like Rabbi Yehuda, or do you use it as an exclusive derivation, and therefore you exclude that which is buried in the ground, like the sages? And therefore, depending on the context of that word, you might use it as an inclusive or an exclusive. And therefore, we have to use that contextually in Egla Rufa to decide, is it going to be inclusive or exclusive? Clear? So let's see the Gemara then. That's the Gemara is about to say. Amarav, second line on the widest set of lines. Right, the line begins with the Vav Ches Chaf Aleph, the Chacham Imim, and then 5 words in. Amarav, Rav says, Afilu Tema, we could even suggest Rabbanon that our sages is consistent, that our Mishnah is consistent with the sages. The reason why Rav would want to do that is because, first of all, we have a principle that we've mentioned here a number of times, as much as we can avoid dispute, we do. unless it's been told to us that there is a dispute. That's number one. Number two, our Mishnah has no challengers. And if the sages disagree with our Mishnah, that means the sages is actually a lone voice against the majority, which would mean our unchallenged Mishnah is actually inconsistent with the halacha. So we're much better off if we were to resolve this by saying that the sages actually don't dispute our Mishnah and leave our Mishnah unchallenged. It would make our halacha much more consistent. Otherwise, we'd be stuck with ruling against an unchallenged Mishnah. Based on a challenge, we're finding a different set of laws. Clear? This is why Rabbi is compelled, presumably, to try to reconcile our Mishnah with the sages and say that even though the sages dispute the meaning of basada with respect to the forgotten sheaf, they do not dispute the meaning of it with respect to the egla rufa, and they will agree that if you find a corpse lying buried in the ground, the mitzvah doesn't apply.
All right, because the sages on this particular subject didn't dispute.
They didn't say anything. We are just suggesting that the dispute is consistent. That's correct. We're trying to make the dispute consistent and thus make our Mishnah contradict the sages. And now we're going to say, no, the cases are not consistent, and therefore the sages, which argue in the case of the forgotten sheaf, do not argue in the case of the egla rufa. How is that? Because again, the question is not whether beis means on or in, but a question of this extra word basada. Is it inclusive or exclusive? So let's see. Afilu tema, we could even suggest Rabbanan that the sages will agree that if you find a corpse in the ground, it is not part of the egla rufa. And yet, if you find a sheaf in the ground, it is part of the mitzvah of the forgotten sheaf, part of shikha. Yes? How's that? Clear, Robert? Or see the wheels are turning there?
On or in is considered the same.
It's not a question of on or in. It's a question of the extra word is used to exclude or include. So we're dropping the dispute for on or in. Because if we're disputing on or in, then you have to be consistent. Either bim means in or bim means on.
Right.
And then you would have to say the sages dispute even with respect to the egla rufa. Because if they say in the field means literally even if it's buried in the field, then they'll have to say in the ground also means literally if you find the corpse buried in the ground. But we're saying no, it's not a question of in or on. It's a question of this word basada, which is extra. Is it exclusive or inclusive? In the case of the forgotten sheaf, we're going to say it's inclusive to include even something buried in the ground. And with respect to egla rufa, we're going to say it's exclusive and say no, it doesn't. It's coming to exclude that which is buried in the ground. Okay. How so? How do we use the same word as an inclusive or an exclusive? So that's what the Gemara is about to do. Because hacha, here, me'inyana dekra, here, following contextually in the verse, you would make it to be exclusive. And hasam, there, me'inyana dekra, in the context of the verse, you would make it inclusive. Contextually here, it's inclusive. Contextually here, it's exclusive. How so?
And this word again is what?
Either basada in the field or ba'adama on the ground. Okay? So again, it's not a question of translation, it's a question of inclusive or exclusive. Right? So Rav is suggesting that contextually you will decide whether it's inclusive or exclusive.
Contextually, yeah.
How so? Let's see. So let's read Tiksiv. Let's start with egla rufa. With respect to egla rufa, the third line of the wider set of lines. Third word. Or second word. Tiksiv, because the verse reads with respect to egla rufa. Ki yamatzeh chalo. When you find a corpse. The next word is be'adama. That's the word in question. Right? But if I said ki yamatzeh chalo alone, without saying in the field, what would you say?
If you said what? Sorry.
If the verse only said when you find a corpse, without saying in the field, without saying the next word be'adama, all it said was when you find a corpse, what would you say? What would you say it means? It's unqualified. Hey, whatever, whatever you find it. If the verse anywhere. Which means, therefore, if the opening words are completely broad and non-defined, then contextually, what's the next word come to tell you? To exclude something.
For sure.
So bi'adama, therefore the next word which says in the ground must be prat, must be an exclusionary statement. Excluding what? L'tamon, something that's buried.
Is this
because
like a klal prat?
It's like a klal prat. And the extra word comes in context. If what you're starting off with is a general statement, unqualified, then the next word is going to be to exclude. Otherwise, why is it there? And therefore, if the verse opens up when you find a corpse anywhere, then it says on the ground. Why are you adding that? You must come to exclude something. You're excluding that which is buried in the ground. But Hassam there, by the law of the forgotten sheaf, it's in the context of that verse. What's the context? The ksiv there, the verse reads. What's the first half? When you're reaping your harvest in the field. So I already know where you are. We already excluded everything.
Yeah,
but then it adds.
Field.
Sorry?
Limited to your field.
Then it says, 1 second. Then it says, and you forgot oimer. So which means, before you add the word basada, right, there's the second basada, right? It's twice.
Yeah.
First it says, when you're reaping the harvest in your field, so we know you're in your field, and you forget the sheaf. If I stop there, I didn't add the word basada, what would you say? Now, where's that lost stuff?
In your field.
Relative to what? Your harvest. And where's harvest? In the ground? It's on the ground. So shikha, the forgetfulness, therefore, would be dumya, would be comparable to the kotzer, the harvest. Ma kotzer begaloy, just as harvesting is only for stuff that are on your field. You don't harvest buried sheaf. You harvest. So af shikha, so too the shikha. Begaloy is that which is exposed. So if the word basada wasn't there, you would assume it's only things you forgot on your field. And therefore, Kasav Rachman, when the merciful one, when the verse writes, basada in your field, we've already excluded everything but that which is on your field. And must be coming, Rabbi to include, because you've already limited it. So what's it coming to include? Satamun, that which is concealed.
Oh, that's where the second word comes in.
That's right.
To tell you that it's not only harvest,
but it's even that which is inside. Exactly. Because the forgotten harvest you would have known from the opening verse.
So it's the opposite of the
contextually.
One's adding a word to limit, one's adding a word to expand.
But it's based on context. The question is, because when the Gemara opened up with the comparison, the Gemara said, well, let's translate the word. Is bit in or bit on? Right. And then keep it consistent. Says Rav, no, we can do it differently. We can ask ourselves, is this word is extra, both by egla rufa in the ground and both by shikha in the field.
So it's open for interpretation.
The question is, what would you have thought otherwise? In the case of egla rufa, where the opening line without in your ground is non-qualified, therefore the extra word in your ground is coming to qualify and say, 1 second, only on the ground, not in. But in the case of the forgotten sheaf, where to begin with, our thinking is it's only that which is forgotten from your harvest, and harvest is only on the ground. So it's already a limited. Comes the added word of besada to include something in your ground. Yeah? So this is Rav changing our understanding of the dispute of Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbanan, and thus everybody could agree consistently with our Mishnah that when a corpse is found in the ground, not included in the egla rufa procedure. I was thinking, just to conclude with this, because tomorrow the Gemara is going to do a little more of an mental exercise on the road of shikha. Because the Gemara is going to, what we've done before, the Gemara is going to ask, well, why didn't Rabbi Yehuda think like the sages? Why didn't he read the verses like the sages? And the Gemara is going to go in reverse. Well, why didn't the sages read the verse like Rabbi Yehuda? And then back and forth until we come to, okay, they're arguing about this letter. You know, one says this letter is worthy of interpretation, and the other one says this word letter is not. We had it earlier with the Vav. Right? The Gemara is going to do a very similar exercise tomorrow. But I just wanted to add, thinking about this, why is the Gemara so insistent that the corpse that's buried in the ground is not part of the egla rufa? Why not? So perhaps getting back to what we learned in Chassidus, the egla rufa is all about acknowledging the existence of negative and saying, you stay away. You only have to do that when it's openly and brazenly bothering you. If it's buried in the ground, it's not causing you any trouble. Why would you dig it up? So as equally as important as it is to acknowledge negative that exists and push it into a corner, it's also equally important not to make a bigger deal out of it than it is. And if it's not causing you any trouble, you don't have to dig for it. Perhaps that's the lesson here in the corpse not being dug up and say, oh, we have an Eglah Rufa. Look, it's buried in the ground. It's buried in the ground. Good, leave it there. You don't have to dig it up. Because this is another trouble sometimes we do. We want, in our effort to acknowledge all the negative we have, we end up digging up negative that was, dormant for years. Now all of a sudden it's bothering me all day. So I dug it up. So perhaps therefore the lesson here is that the kind of negative we have to acknowledge and push aside is the kinds that gnaw at us. But the kinds that are buried in the ground and aren't causing us any issue, don't make a big deal. Don't make a thing out of it. Leave it right there in the ground. When it comes to the surface, now you got to acknowledge it, cut it out, throw it down the azazel, throw it down the cliff. But until such time that it's openly defying you, there's no reason to dig it up. That's perhaps the lesson here. Yeah.
That would make sense in the case of one buried in the ground, but what about the one hanging from the tree?
Yeah, I was thinking of that. And the same thing with the floating on the river. What's the meaning of that? I don't know.
It's interesting. This is very interesting. Why?
Yeah, I'm only zeroing on this.
What's with the ground that's so unique?
Good question. Leave it open. And again, this is only my reading, so you can disregard it if you don't like it. But the only reason why I'm going with this is because the Gemara is doing a whole exercise to insist that everybody agrees if it's buried in the ground, it's not part of it.
Yeah.
And the Gemara said, hey, it's a dispute. Okay, some yes, some no. But you're right.
It's more metaphorically in the ground.
The Gemara gives it more real estate on the page to discuss in the ground.
Right.
But on the other hand, okay, the Gemara is going to get into this more. So maybe we'll get something. On the other hand, with respect to the floating corpse and the hanging corpse, there isn't even a dispute. Everybody agrees, of course, it's not part of the Omer. And then that too is a question, why? So you're right, it's still open-ended, and the floor is open to interpretation. Okay, you can have a wonderful day, and God willing, we'll hear good news. So tomorrow we'll have a class.
Good news, amen.
And tomorrow night I'm going, B'ezrat Hashem, and then we'll pick up again on Monday after that. So tomorrow I'm hoping we're going to finish this whole back and forth till we get to the point at which Rabbi or Yehuda and the sages agree or disagree on one particular letter, as we're going to see. Okay, wonderful day, Eden.